Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My guest this week is Tim Just. Tim is a national tournament director, FIDE national arbiter, and editor of the 5th, 6th, and 7th editions of the US Chess Rulebook. He is also the author of My Opponent is Eating a Donut and Just Law, two books that we will discuss in a little bit. Additionally, Tim revised The Guide to Scholastic Chess to help teachers and scholastic organizers who wish to begin or strengthen their school chess program. US Chess awarded Tim the 2022 Tournament Director Lifetime Achievement Award. He is also a member of the US Chess Rules Committee, plus the Tournament Director Certification Committee. His column, exclusive to US Chess, Just the Rules, is intended to help clarify potentially confusing rules and regulations. So, Tim, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on.
I'm glad you asked me. Thanks for letting me be here.
Absolutely. So I figured we would break the ice by discussing your background as a tournament director, specifically how you got started. Obviously, you started playing chess, but I'd love to hear about your path and your trajectory to becoming a national tournament director and, to the level of involvement you have now in running tournaments and chess administration.
It's kind of funny how I started. As a player, I was here in Lake County, and there was a fellow named Kevin Bachler who ran a couple of tournaments, but he needed help. And I still remember the day he called for help. I'm cleaning out the gutters. I'm hanging off a ladder. And he calls me up and says, "I need help. How'd you like to be a tournament director?" And I shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" And from there, I started hooking up with some of the bigger names here in Illinois. Dick Verber, the late Dick Verber, who ran things, Helen Warren, Fred Grunberg. And they just hired me as a minor staff position. And I got to observe how the big guys were doing it. And I just kept moving up the ladder at more important tournaments and doing more important jobs. And eventually, I ended up being an NTD. What really helped was the National Open in Vegas. Fred Grunberg kindly brought me on staff, and I went from being an assistant to Robert Brown. No, not the GM, Robert Brown, the NTD. And he taught me so many things about running those big tournaments. And eventually I moved up that ladder until I went every year for over 20 years. And I used all those skills when I wrote the books and when I did things, to help other TDs out who would email me a question or two. And that's how I became an NTD. That's the short version.
Right. Okay. Now, are you playing at all? Are you active as a player, or that's kind of behind you? Maybe I'm not sure what you're.
That's behind me. I'm an early to bed guy. And if you go to bed at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, that's not real good for playing in chess tournaments.
Yeah.
I do play Skittles games with some former members of the old chess club I belong to in Lake County. We meet at a buffet and we just play fast games, game 10 with an increment of, 5 seconds, 2 seconds. And I haven't done that in quite a while either. My energy is low when it comes to playing chess for long periods of time.
Right.
So I still enjoy it, though. At the buffet, you lose a game, somebody else takes your place, and you got something to do in between games.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. I want to jump to chess cheating because, it's a big topic of discussion now. Obviously, at the highest levels of chess, even, we have the whole Hans Niemann situation. I'm not going to get into that now, but I want to bring it to the amateur level. Obviously, online, it's a big problem. I mean, the chess servers, the people who run the chess servers, they often claim that it's not as prevalent as people think. I'm not going to get into that debate now, but I know that chess.com has said that they've closed the accounts of hundreds of players a day, according to one report. I don't know where that is now, but it's definitely an issue online. But I'm wondering, what's the temperature of this at major amateur over the board events? Now, as someone myself who's a club level director running a local weekly chess club, I don't think it's really that much of a problem. We only had one situation at the club, and we've been around since 2007. And when this person did cheat, he was sandbagging. It was just so obvious, but it generally is really not a problem. But I'm wondering, what is the situation, or what is the level of chess cheating at the amateur level at these major over the board events? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
The level of cheating is less than the actual complaints about the cheating. As a TD, I keep getting people coming up and saying, my opponent cheated. There's no way he could have came up with that move otherwise. Well, you got some evidence? Well, of course they don't have evidence. They lost the game. They're not happy, and they lost a good move. For a while, people were going to the restroom and using their cell phones. That's CCA is kind of taking care of that when they want people, or they sit a TD outside of a restroom to take a cell phone. At the mid-size ones tournaments, where there's only 50 or 100 players, there's probably not a lot going on. The prizes aren't big enough to cheat for. I have never personally caught someone actually cheating. The closest I've come is I was at a US Open, and while this wasn't actual cheating, the parent almost got himself arrested. His son was playing another young man, and his son kept going to the washroom. The other young man went to the washroom even more. So he followed his son's opponent, and when the son's opponent closed the door, this man climbed over the wall to watch the kid. The parent of that student wanted to have that dad arrested.
Oh my goodness.
And what the student was doing, what the kid was doing, was he was so bored by his game. He was playing chess online. It had nothing to do with the game he was currently essaying over at the US Open.
Wow. So what ended up happening to that parent?
Everybody gave him a stern talking to. Nobody called the police. His son forfeited that game because he shouldn't have been doing that. And never happened again at that tournament. And I was just a spectator there that time. I wasn't actually directing, because I go to the US Opens as a delegate often. You're wandering around to see what happens. And that's one of the things that happened. I'm sure somehow someone who wants to cheat will find a way. I'm just convinced that there's enough technology to do it. I'm also convinced that the old-fashioned way of cheating is still there. Nobody looks for it. The old-fashioned way. You hire yourself a high-rated player, typically a GM. You pay him some money to walk around, look at all the games, including yours, and you set up the old magician's trick where you signal each other. Nobody checks for that. I take it back. I did catch someone doing an interesting cheating routine. It was the Illinois class tournament. And someone came up to me and said, hey, so-and-so over there is cheating. Her boyfriend is, giving her moves. Really? Well, let me go watch. It wasn't her boyfriend. It was another young man, and he was looking for a date. So he took one of those styrofoam coffee cups and he stood behind her opponent, and he would analyze the board, and he'd go out with his friends and talk about the best move. And he came back and he would hold the move he wrote on the cup right up to his chest. So all you saw was the white coffee cup. And he'd turn around and show her the right move. I threw them both out of the tournament.
Yeah. Wow.
And of course, they claimed their innocence, but her score sheet matched the cups. Yeah, like a silly person he was, he kept the cups. And they disappeared, and they were sitting out in his car. I didn't pay any attention to him after that.
Wow. That's unbelievable. So other than these sort of anomalies, if I'm understanding you, there's really not much cheating going on in these events, and the accusations of cheating far outweigh the actual cheating. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. the people come up with things that I don't know how it's technologically possible, and it would be costly. My opponent is using his clock to get signals. Excuse me. Well, could you tell me how that works? I don't see the clock acting funny. They're just convinced every little thing is cheating, and it's not. It's good to be aware that your opponent could be cheating. Probably not.
Yeah. And I see a little bit of that at my local club where it's like you said, someone's playing well or finds a good move, or maybe they just get up from the board a lot. I mean, I get up from the board a lot, right? Because, I drink a lot of water. I also find that it helps me concentrate, just stepping away from the board, looking at something else and coming back, it does wonders.
It does.
A lot of people use that as a technique, but even someone like me who gets up a lot, I could easily see how someone taking that attitude could think, oh, what is he doing? Is he checking his phone? Is he cheating? But, I agree with you. There's really very little of it going on. But in this culture now, everyone thinks, you're playing a low rated player who's doing really well, or they find this crazy move or they get up from the board. Well, they must be cheating. And that's how the culture is now.
Everybody has the tournament of their life without cheating, and they just crush their opponents, and their opponents are just now convinced that there's no way that 1300 could have played me a 1700 and beat me that badly. Yes, there is a way. Everybody has a good game like that.
Along those lines, or sort of along those lines, I want to talk about chess parents. We all know the stereotype of, the chess parent, the chess mom, the chess dad. And the scene, I'm sure, in Searching for Bobby Fischer, where,
Yeah.
The tournament director goes, and I want you all to act like adults, or whatever it is. I'm paraphrasing. And you think he's talking to the kids and he's talking to the parents, right? Or no, he goes, I think I want you all to act your age, or something like that. And it's the parents. And of course, that's the stereotype. I've dealt with a few myself where, they're complaining about their opponent's rating. They're complaining about this. It's like they want the tournament to be sort of jerry-rigged for their own child's progress. But I have to say, for me as a TD, that's been very, very rare. We do have a number of kids who come to our club, and 99% of them, the kids, the parents, excellent people, excellent families, really respectful. But that stereotype is out there. So I asked you how prevalent chess cheating is. How prevalent are these sort of like pushy, domineering chess parents at these events, and especially the big major scholastic events?
It got so bad that US Chess banned them from the room. Their child was being picked on. Their child wasn't being treated fair, when in fact their child was treated like everybody else. Us TDs just don't have the time or energy to be picking on one kid. It just doesn't happen. They just got banned finally because they would. I remember once I was working in the back room and I had some information I had to give one of the floor TDs. I don't even remember what the information was. I walked out there and parents were pointing at me and grabbing at me and saying, that child has his hand up. You got to go help him. I said, well, I'm not a floor person. I don't mean to, ignore that child, but I have to give this to the section chief so he can solve a lot of problems. On my way back, if that hand was still up, I, of course, stopped and helped. But parents in the room are always pointing and carrying on. And I know you want the best for your kids. Everybody does. That's just human nature. But I just don't see that much cheating that's caught, because like I said, I'm convinced at money tournaments or big scholastics where there's trophies involved, somebody has figured a way to do it, and some other parent has almost seen it. I don't know if this is in my opponent is eating a donut or not. Wayne Clark, the late Wayne Clark, had an interesting situation with a parent. Parent came up and said, that team wearing those sweaters, they're going to the washroom together all the time. You need to put somebody in there and watch and see if they're cheating. Wayne says, well, my staff is completely busy. Who would I get to do that? And the parent says, well, you go up to the microphone next round and ask if we can get some volunteers to go in there. Wayne wisely replied, so you want me to ask if we can get men to follow little boys into the washroom? And the parent said, oh, no, that's not going to work.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
I forgot how Wayne solved the problem, but he did.
Yeah. So now when you say like the fact that parents are banned from the tournament hall, right? Like coaches and parents are not allowed in the tournament hall. You spoke about this a little bit. The main issue was what like parents thought all the other parents were helping their kids during the game. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's the main issue, and they're afraid that their child's opponent is getting special treatment somehow.
Okay.
Well, you let him drink a cup of water that water could have a message on it. Well, it might. I told you the styrofoam cup routine.
So every cough, every scratch, every
Yeah,
twist, every arm movement
means
is some
something.
type of signal.
Yeah. No, it
Yeah.
isn't.
Okay.
One time when I was at, and I forgot what the Scholastic event was in Peoria, Illinois, I'm the floor chief. And the first thing I did when I stood up there before the parents were asked to leave, we said, parents, coaches, please leave now. And once they were out of the room, I said, students, I want you to vote. Let's vote on whether we let the parents stay and watch your games or you want them to leave the room. Like 90% raised their hand and said, get them out of here. They're an annoyance. They're bothersome.
Okay, that's funny. Speaking of all this, all of these sort of tournament situations, I want to talk about My Opponent is Eating a Donut. Great book. I read it a while ago on my Kindle when it first came out. And for those not familiar, and I'm going to put links for all this stuff in the show notes if you want to check it out. My Opponent is Eating a Donut. It's all about wild and interesting tournament stories, right? Some of which Tim spoke about already, but I highly recommend it. It's really entertaining. So, what I was hoping you could do, Tim, maybe there's one, two, or three stories from there, or maybe other stories that aren't in the book that you could also share with us. Because for this episode, I really want to get into some of these sort of wild things that happen at tournaments that, people may not believe or people aren't aware that these things actually go on. So I'll let you go in whatever direction you want, whatever stories you want to share.
Let me start by saying how that book came about. My friend Wayne Clark would come over here to the local coffee shop and he'd say, Tim, come on by. And we live close to each other. We're good friends. And we kind of hooked up with this guy who was a retired airline pilot. We'd tell him these stories. And one day my brain says, these would be good in a book I could self-publish on Amazon. So Wayne and I came up with it. And the guy who edited the book came up with a story. My opponent is eating a donut. He came up with that headline. I don't know how many people have heard this. I love telling this story. It was the National Open, Las Vegas, round one, 11 a.m. And I happened to be working the floor. And this little old man, Middle European accent, don't know where he was from, but, he looked to be in his 60s, maybe early 70s, says, I have complaint. My opponent, he is annoying me. Now, there's a rule, right? You cannot annoy your opponent. So, well, what's the problem? He is eating at board. Oh, I'm thinking, it's 11 in the morning. It's Vegas. Is his opponent eating steak and eggs? What's his opponent doing? Said, well, let's go over there and look. So as we're walking over, so just what's he eating? Donuts. So now my brain's going, oh no, powdered sugar donut all over the board. This is, I don't want to deal with this. But you got to, you're the TD. I get there and I don't see donuts. I don't see food at all. The opponent had a donut on his lap underneath the tablecloth and would bend over and take a bite every now and then. So I denied the man's complaint. And he goes, this is not right. No one should ever eat donut at board. It is not right. And I said, well, I'm sorry. You can appeal my decision. He goes all the way up to the chief TD who says, no, sorry. He gets to eat his donut. What nobody told him, what we didn't have the heart to say to him was the organizer, Freddie Grunberg, had ordered donuts next round for everybody. The man was not happy. We just sent him right to Freddie. Go talk to the organizer.
Yeah, and at least he was being discreet about eating his donut, right? You got to give him that.
Eating his donut, yeah. He didn't. It wasn't like he had like a bag of Cheetos there, or one of those little Hostess cupcake things where he's got to play with the paper. Oh, I wouldn't have known. Another story from the book. In Las Vegas, This is where we thought some cheating was going on, as a matter of fact. It was board one in a section, and it was the last round. And these two guys are scheduled to play each other. And we're checking around, and everybody's playing, but these two. We're thinking, oh, they're colluding somewhere. They want to see what the results are before they decide what they're going to do. Maybe if they draw, they get some more money, or if one of them wins and the other loses, they can just, behind the scenes, split the money. We couldn't find them anywhere. Finally, they show up and sit down, and we get them aside. We're concerned. They went, oh, no. We were watching TV. You were watching TV. It's March Madness, and one was for one team, and one was for the other college team, and they sat at the bar watching the game until it was over. They weren't colluding at all. We mistakenly said they were colluding. Did you know there's 1,000 move rule?
1,000? I've heard of the 50 move rule.
No, 1,000 move rule. Tournament, one of the sections, a big tournament's going on, and these two guys are being hard-headed. There's nothing going on there, and the position is blocked. They're just shuffling pieces over and over. Nobody wants to offer a draw. Absolutely no one. And we got to make the pairings. We got to do something. But they're meeting, all the 40 moves an hour quota. They're meeting at 40 moves in 10 minutes. And pretty soon Wayne Clark comes up and he says, fellas, I hate to inform you this, but there's 1,000 move rule. I've been counting, and you've met it. The game's a draw. And they're both going, oh, thank goodness. Oh, guys, come on. It's called offer a draw, I'm thinking.
Well, I got a funny draw story. This happened about a week and a half ago at the club. I'm curious what you think, Tim, because you are the guru of chess tournament directing. So, older gentleman at the club, there have been some issues with him as far as like touch move rule claims and things like that. And, we both know that that's very, very tricky because unless there's a witness, right? It's the whole thing. It's better to deny a true claim than to uphold a false one. It's that whole thing. But anyway, in this situation, he's playing basically his opponent. It's this very tough drawn endgame. He has a king. I might be a little off, but it's close enough. He has like a king and minor piece, like let's say king and knight. His opponent has king, bishop, and pawn. And they're moving around, and it's a rook pawn, so he's having trouble making progress. He's convinced it's a draw, but his opponent doesn't want to draw, right? His opponent's trying to queen the pawn. What I found out was that he ended up going over the score sheet and wrote half during the game because he's like, well, it's a draw. I don't know why he keeps playing. And, I find this out, and I'm like, listen, you do anything like this again, you're not coming back. I mean, it's tough. It's like an older gentleman. You don't want to be like, but that's like pretty serious. But, these are the things that you deal with. And I'm like, number one, he has every right to play for the win.
Yes.
Okay. Number two, he's like, oh, but he played I'm like, the 50 move rule is if there's no captures or pawn moves, you're not even close to that. So like I can stand and watch. But I go, the fact that you wrote down a result when the game wasn't over, but it's a draw. There's nothing, that when you gave that 1,000 move rule story, this kind of reminded me of that. But I very rarely deal with a situation like that, but that was very troubling to say the least.
Yeah. And I bet you he does it again sometime.
Yeah. Well, then, I mean, a few of the other players were like, yeah, no, he's done some things. I mean, I know I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Like when you have a club and the regulars, and again, 99.999% of our regulars are awesome, but like with touch move, obviously now for the listeners, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong here, if someone claims a touch move rule, oh, you touched the piece, and the other guy is like, no, I didn't do it. If it's like a he said thing, unless there's a witness, you have to deny the claim.
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just, it's very tough because there are situations where I know I so know that you touched the piece. I just know it, but I have to rule that way. In other words, I can't say, well, I know what the rule book says, but I'm going to accept the claim because I know your reputation. You can't do that, right? I'm bound by the rules where unless there's a witness, is that correct?
That's true, but it's a club tournament, so you can make it a club rule that you get to do that as the TD. You say, yeah, it's a draw. It's part of our club rules that we post. It's the sneaky way around everything in the rule book. Rule 1, post your rules. And then you can do just about anything you want.
I didn't realize I could do it. So if I post something saying that, the TD for touch move rule, the TD reserves discretion to make a decision, I can do that.
Yes. And everybody knows you can do it. So if they complain afterwards, you say, but those were the rules when you signed up. That's what we do here. And you could still have the out of saying, I don't have enough evidence to make a ruling. And you still have that in your hip pocket.
Good to know.
The purveyor of having your own set of rules is CCA, Bill Goichberg and CCA. He has his own set of exceptions to the rule book. They're on his site somewhere, and I don't know where he posts them at his tournament. I've worked for him. I just happen to work in the back room, so I didn't pay attention to that. And those are the rules that he posts and says you have to live by this or don't sign up.
Right. Something like no draws by agreement prior to, X move.
Yeah. What did he do? What he did for a lot of years was that you had to have a setting board to claim a to claim a win, a forfeit win on time. If the setting board wasn't there, you had to sit there until the flag fell for the 2-hour time limit, if that's what it was. He didn't let you just go the 1 hour. Because his thinking was, and he does have a point, that if your opponent shows up, how are they going to make a move if they just show up real quick and they got 1 minute left? They can't make a move. You don't have a setting board. And if you're white, you haven't made your move. A lot of Bill's rules make sense, especially for the kind of tournaments he runs. The big money, I love to play at the World Open kind of tournaments.
Any other stories you want to share?
This is not in the book, but it's a good story. Helen Warren is running the US Masters. And I got selected as the TD. Okay, I'm a big-time TD. I'm US Masters. Or I was the chief assistant. I don't remember which. And a game had to be adjourned. So we adjourned it, and we said, you're going to finish tonight. Well, guess who the last game was that hadn't finished? Same fellow whose game we adjourned. And it was one of those draws you have to eke out, move by move. That game was lasting forever. And the fellow waiting for the adjourn game to play the same opponent, he wanted to leave too. So this master, and he wasn't a GM, just a local master, says, I'll play them both at once. We said, but they're both GMs, both your opponents. I play them both at once. It's a dead draw. I don't even have to think. He was right. He sat there and played them both at once, crossed his arms. One of them made a move. He'd look, he'd go, bam, bam. In his world, it was a dead draw, and the GMs were trying to hope that he would make a mistake and they could win. And they were really happy to allow him to play both those GMs at once. They're figuring, he'll make a mistake. No, he didn't. That was the one. I went, no, these guys aren't letting them do that. Yeah, they did.
Let's talk about some of your other books and other writing. So Just Law it's one of my favorites. It's probably going to be more appealing and more useful to TDs and directors, but players, I would encourage players to check it out as well. It's called Just Law: Common Sense Answers to Frequently Asked Questions on Rules, Regulations, and Policy from Players, Tournament Directors, and Organizers. It's sort of a clarification type of book, right? Because the rule book itself, which is very well written, it's a lot, it's dense, and sometimes you need just further explanation. And it's a fantastic book, but maybe you could tell us what was the impetus for writing that book and the types of things that are in it.
That's an interesting story. Here I go again. There was an organizer, the late Savan Meridian. All my friends are the late. I'm outliving them all. That's sad for me. I miss my friends. He did a lot of chess work here in Illinois, running bigger tournaments, smaller tournaments. He wanted to be involved in FIDE and running things. And he says, Tim, I'm going to have a website. I want you to write the column. I said, really? You want me to write the column? Okay, I'll do that. We have several lunches, got the format down, and I wrote a year's worth of columns because I didn't want to be sitting there every week. And he said, yeah, we'll just set it up so every week we'll post a new one. Well, he passed away. And I had all this work. And my brain said, well, I put out my opponent is eating a donut. I can do this too. So I went back and re-edited some stuff. And I just put the book out based on all the columns I was writing that were really more like TD tips, actually. And that one has outsold the donut book, which amazed me. I thought, this is kind of dry, but I'll put it out. And I did, and I've been happy. It's helped a lot of people. It probably needs updating, but I haven't done that yet.
I mean, it's pretty like evergreen, I guess. It's pretty relevant because I read it, again, both of your books, like My Opponent's Eating a Donut and this, I read them relatively soon after they came out. I mean, they're both, I was kind of skimming through it for this interview. And I mean, it's both, the Just Law one is still pretty relevant, I will say. I mean, maybe a few things, but it's not like you need to do a second edition because it's outdated. It's not like that at all.
No, there might be one or two little things that change, which is true of the rule book when it went from the 6th to the 7th edition. I included all the stuff that the delegates had passed, but most of it was what I call piddly small stuff, mainly aimed at TDs. If you do this action, and here's the way you should respond. Well, most players don't care about that. It's just little things that didn't mean anything to them. They're administrative things mostly. Players can get something out of the book. They can say, oh, I didn't know that I could do that with this rule. And I think the book alludes to the create your own rules, rule 1, that we just mentioned. Not too many organizers have taken advantage of that.
Yeah.
So it really is a nice little compact rule book written in plain language. So you don't have to read all the lawyerese type language that the delegates and the rules committee tend to use.
Right. That's it's almost, and I mean this in a positive way, it's almost like a Cliff Notes version of the rule book in a sense.
Oh yeah, you're right. It is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
No, I have it. I keep it on me. It's really, really good. And I want to talk about your guide to Scholastic Chess, which you revised.
Yeah.
What that is, it's available online. It's free. I'll link it up. It's basically a PDF. Can you talk a little bit about what's in that and what you revised and what kind of information?
This is going to be a short story. I got something from the Scholastic Committee, and they said, check out the TD references here in the rules. And I couldn't. There was no table of contents. The fonts were different every other line. It wasn't that bad, but it was close. There were links in there that were no good. So I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll edit it. I'm going to make this thing look professional. There's going to be a table of contents. There's going to be this. There's going to be that. I'll fix up that. I'll make sure all the links are good. And at the same time, they were soliciting advice from people who have successful school programs. So I added that, and that's the short story. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. I know I got some pats on the back for the thing, but all I did was some actual secretarial work with Word.
Right, because a lot of organizers of Scholastic Chess programs, a lot of them are beginners themselves. Like right, they're not generally, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, most Scholastic coaches and people who run programs at schools, a lot of them, they're not strong players. Many of them are kind of learning themselves. So
yeah,
they need some guidance, right?
Yes, they do. And that guidance, most of it was already there when I was handed that manuscript, which made me shake my head. And it only took me, I don't know, I call them afternoons. I tend to work on these things in the afternoon. It only took me a week's worth of afternoons or so to get the thing done. You know, you press a button or two in Word and bingo, you've got a table of contents. There was one person that kept adding in things, and I told her, no, you got to stop. What you're telling me to do works in your school. I taught school. I don't think it's going to work in every school for everyone that reads this manuscript.
Couple more things I want to ask you about, but I just want to do a little sidestep. Are you still involved in directing tournaments now? Or are you more just like writing? Are you kind of like behind the scenes? I meant to ask you this earlier. Like, what's your level of involvement in actual tournaments now?
Because of my early going to bed at 6:30, I just show up, wave to people, shake hands, sign books. at the recent US Amateur Team North. I showed up, passed out rule books to the TDs, said hi to my old chess playing friends, and I was home by 11 o'clock, 11 a.m. And the first round started at 10. So I don't direct anymore. I'm more of a resource. Now, that doesn't mean I won't. It just means I'm not willing to stay up till 2 in the morning to direct tournaments.
Yeah, the last round has to begin at like 1 p.m. or something, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If that happens, it sort of works at the senior tournaments. But the people there are starting to say, well, no, look, I'm in my 80s. We need a separate section for us. There aren't that many of you, I'm sorry, that are willing to show up and play in these things. It's similar to the article, The Blind. I did the US Blind for many years. Love those guys. And they would be lucky to have a dozen people there. It was usually less. And the complaint was that the totally blind players were saying, we need to play each other. It's not fair that the legally blind players get to play and they can still see the board and the pieces and sets. Okay, they're a little bigger, but I can't see it all. It's just not fair. I have to play them. We couldn't do the pairings if we split you guys up.
Right. You wouldn't have been able to run the tournament otherwise.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your column now, Just the Rules.
Go ahead.
Right. Your last name, we could do the puns all day, right? We could do, but I'm not going to do it because I'm sure you get that a lot. I'm sure you get that a lot. It's like when I had FM Alex King on the podcast, and I'm like, your last name's King, and I'm like, I'm not going to do any jokes that you have the best last name for a chess player because I'm like, you must hear that all day, every day. And I was like sitting on it for a week, and right when we were about to record, I'm like, no, I'm not going there.
We at our club, in a similar story, we had two fellows named BYE. Can you imagine someone looking at the pairings and they're going, I have a bye? And they eventually gave up chess. They didn't show up much after the first year. But, I would always have to put a note on there when I put the pairings up. This is a person. Or I put their first name, by John. We did pairings by hand back in those days. Back to the topic. You were saying?
I just wanted to talk about your column now, Just the Rules, and I'll put a link for it for everybody. I personally enjoy this column. It's similar to it's almost like an online weekly version of Just Law. It's just sort of clarification articles about the rules. But I will tell our listeners, it's not just for TDs. Even as players, I think it's very relevant. It's very informative and it reminds me too how many players, even titled players, mess up things like draw offers.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually quite remarkable. But anyway, I'll let you take this where you want. Tell us about the Just the Rules column.
Often as I can, and I read this later, this was a good thing to do, that you'll see them written on, you are sitting at the board, you see your pairing. So I aim it at the players who really, I want to give some practical advice to of what they can do when something happens. Now, TDs will read and go, oh, yeah, as a TD, I know what I can do now. I know that this method is available. And I like to tell little stories sometimes. The column came about in probably the strangest way. Back when I was doing the other works, the executive director was Bill Hall, the late Bill. There I go again. The late Bill Hall. And he said, Tim, I want you to write something that club TDs can read, and then we can give them credit for becoming a club TD because the rule book's just too complicated for them. So, okay, Bill, I'll do that. Said, you'll publish it, and then we'll have a standard contract, and I'll earn enough money to go take my wife out to dinner. And he goes, yeah. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get him to get moving on that. I wrote the thing, and he quit being the ED. I forgot if he resigned or how that went. And I had all this material. And I said, I could publish this, and maybe I'll talk the new ED into doing this. The new ED was Gene Hoffman. And I can every year at the US Open, I say, Gene, look what I have. Can we do something with this? Well, I'll get back to you. Next year, Gene, can we do something with this? So I gave it one last shot after several years. She was on her way out. She was going to a different job. And we sat down at breakfast. a buffet. I love buffets. We sat down at breakfast. This is Gene. Look, I wrote this for US Chess, and what I'd like is I want the rights to these columns. That way I can publish them one a week on my own site. They would make, I know it's a book, but I can make great columns out of these. He says, wait, Shahadi's the editor of the online stuff. I think we can get your columns online. Yes, you can, I say. Yes, I don't get paid for that, but the columns made it. Shahadi came up with Just the Law. That was her input. And I just started writing one a month. It's getting hard to do the one a month. I've covered a lot of topics.
No, I enjoy it. I know you post it on Facebook in the TD group.
Yes, I do.
I always take a look at it. I always enjoy it. Very direct, very to the point. I want to end with this. This has been a lot of fun, Tim. Any US chess rule changes that players should be aware of, or maybe any common rules that are often misunderstood by players? Anything you want to share along that?
Well, you mentioned the draw offer. That's commonly misunderstood. And commonly misunderstood is draw versus resign. You reach out and shake hands. Are you shaking hands on the draw, or are you shaking hands on the resign? That you ought to make sure when you're shaking those hands to say, is this a draw, or are you resigning? Players mess that up, and then that gets to be messy trying to solve that problem. Coming up, there isn't too much left in the main body of the rules that's going to change. There's a current movement in over on the US Chess site where you can post your own stuff. That's like Facebook, to rewrite blitz rules. And it's probably going to come before the delegates, but delegates don't typically anoint entire chapters brought up by somebody for no reason at all, except they didn't like some of the wording. There's a fellow that contacts me constantly about the wording in blitz. He says, well, this could mean that and this and the next thing. I said, well, change the rule. He's a delegate this year, so he wants the rules rewritten. So we could get a new blitz chapter. I've looked at the rewritten rules, shook my head and said, but it's not that different. I didn't tell him that. He has a right to show that to the delegates. He'll be a delegate. I offhand can't think of that many changes that players would notice. And there are even some that would escape TDs. One TD I saw 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was handing out the free rulebook, and their response was, yeah, I'm still using the 5th edition.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Right.
That works. And, nobody challenged them on anything. And the rule of thumb I like to use is with the posted rules, with using the 5th edition or even the 4th edition instead of the 7th. If everybody has to play with the same set of rules at that tournament, it's fair.
Well, just so you know, and I'm showing you, I mean, Tim and I can see each other. See, I have the 7th edition, see, and I have the updates, right?
Oh, you got this one too?
Oh, what's that one?
That's the one that came out the first of the year. This one's got the yellow cover.
Oh, okay. Well, I do have the 7th, but the updated chapters, I do have the PDF.
Yeah, that works. I hate to tell you USCF that. I'm sorry, US Chess. See how old I am. Yeah, they finally came out with this. Look at that. My feed says it's backwards. It's a mirror image here. But get the one. This one here has all the updated chapters. But if you don't run online chess, if you don't play correspondence chess, you don't need this book.
Right. I was going to say, for my purposes, like I have the original version of the latest edition, and then on my computer, I have the PDF with all the updates. But it's kind of what you said before. It's mostly just some tweaks and things. It's not like a major overhaul, right?
No. And for the people that are wondering, and I'm sure US Chess will tell me not to say this, but I will, go online. It's free. The chapters that impact TDs and players, the actual rules of play, plus the new chapters. And I think Blitz is all there online. You just downloaded their PDF files. It's one big PDF file now.
Yeah, I was going to say, they won't mind you saying that, because as a TD, I received an email basically from them saying it's available online for free as a PDF.
Ah, good. Now, every year when I revise the rules, I have to give them the PDF file for that.
Now, one terminology clarification for the listeners. The United States Chess Federation is now called US Chess.
Yes, it is.
I don't know what the goal was for that, but I guess it was like this rebranding. It's now US Chess, but you may still hear it referred to as the US Chess Federation or USCF. It's the kind of thing everybody still calls it that. It's kind of like Twitter, right? Twitter is now X. That's technically what it's called. Everybody calls it Twitter, right? And instead of retweeting, you're supposed to say repost. It's kind of like the same thing with US Chess. It's now called US Chess, but everybody still calls it the USCF or the US Chess Federation, right?
In writing, you must not have been around for when they had to change. They had to change it legally.
Oh.
USCF was around before, and then it got mixed up with USCF is the United States Cycling Federation.
That's why they changed it?
That's why they changed it.
Oh.
The two were getting mixed up. It's like some of you who are pro wrestling fans, yes, I am, realize that the WWE.
No, I was going to say I didn't have you pegged as a wrestling fan, but I didn't mean to cut you off. You were saying
the Wrestling Federation is WWE now because the World Wildlife Federation is WWF, and Vince McMahon and the boys said, "Well, we're WWF." They lost that because the World Wildlife Federation was around first.
Did US Chess, did they announce that that's why they changed it and I just missed that? Or are you giving me some inside info?
I don't know. I had inside info in with, so I don't know if they announced it or not. They probably did. There's a fellow out in California who belongs to both organizations, and he continually would say, well, I'm going to do to USCF what I did to US Cycling Federation. And he would keep suing them about things that he thought were unfair. Now, he never got around to suing the United States Chess Federation, but he did something in the Cycling Federation which drove him nuts, cost him money, did something that the general cycling world was not happy about.
So just changing it to US Chess just solved a lot of problems.
That's the way somebody saw it. That's the way the board saw it, and whoever their lawyer was at the time. In those days, they did not have a corporate lawyer. They just hired someone piecemeal. Now they have a corporate lawyer. In fact, the corporate lawyer is now in Illinois, and they're also the person anybody contacts, the corporation, because by state statute, there has to be an address that anyone who wants to deal legally with the Federation can contact. Well, I was that person for years. I'm not a lawyer. I just used my house address. And people would send legal documents, and then I'd have to repackage it and send it off to, in those days, New Windsor or to Tennessee. And I used to say, without me, there was no Federation, because by law, I had to exist.
Right. So let's end it on that note. So this was a lot of fun. This was a nice departure from talking about the game and improvement. Some very interesting tournament stories, some interesting things about the rules. This was a lot of fun. I had a blast. So Tim Just, National Tournament Director, editor of the official rules of chess. Really a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. I had a fun time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for those of you listening at home, we really appreciate it. And I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.